108 years old. And I'm still here. That's the strange part. I buried my husband 23 years ago. Most of my friends are gone now too. Even the doctors who used to lecture me about cholesterol are dead. Every single one of them. And yet every morning, I still sit on this old porch with a cup of black coffee in my hands. The same way I did when I was 16 years old. Same smell. Same silence. Just older bones holding the cup now. People today are obsessed with staying alive. Pills lined up on kitchen counters. Watches tracking every heartbeat. Fear in every grocery aisle. They count calories like prayers. And somehow they still look exhausted. That's the part nobody tells you. People today know more about food than we ever did. But they know less about peace. I've watched an entire generation become afraid of sunlight, rest. Meanwhile, stress eats them alive from the inside. Quietly. Slowly. Like rust. Now listen to me carefully. I'm not saying food doesn't matter. It does. There are 7 things I've eaten most of my life. 7 simple foods these modern experts spent years warning people about. And maybe they helped keep my body alive. But that's not the real secret. The real secret is this. The food kept my body alive. But something else kept my heart from giving up. Because after enough funerals, after enough empty chairs at the table, survival stops becoming physical. It becomes emotional. And sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I still remember that old kitchen from my childhood. The smell of coffee before sunrise. My mother humming softly by the stove. Back before the world became so loud. Back when people still knew how to live, before they became afraid of living at all. The first thing on my list is coffee. Good black coffee. Strong enough to wake the dead. I've been drinking it every morning since I was 16 years old. Back when I still lived with my parents in that little wooden house outside Macon, Georgia. Every morning before sunrise, my father would turn on the radio low enough not to wake the whole house, and my mother would already be standing by the stove. I still remember the sound of bacon grease crackling softly in the pan. The pale morning light slipping through the curtains and that smell. Lord, that smell. Fresh coffee drifting through the house before anyone even spoke a word to each other. Funny thing is, I don't think the coffee was ever really about caffeine. Not after a while. After my husband died, the house became painfully quiet in the mornings. No footsteps. No newspaper folding across the table. No voice asking if I slept well. Just silence. The kind of silence that sits beside you like another person. And some mornings, coffee was the only warm thing waiting for me. That little ritual gave shape to the day. It gave me a reason to get out of bed even when grief made everything feel heavy. You'd be surprised how much a human being can hold on to through one small routine repeated long enough. But now people are afraid of everything. Butter, eggs, coffee, sunlight. They live terrified of every bite they take while stress slowly destroys them from the inside out. They read labels like survival manuals and still can't sleep at night. And after living this long, I've come to believe something most people don't want to hear. Stress killed more people than breakfast ever did. The second thing I've eaten my whole life is berries. Blueberries. Blackberries. Raspberries. Whatever grew wild enough for us to pick with our own hands. When I was a little girl, my mother used to take me out behind the woods after the rain had passed. We carried old tin buckets with bent handles, and our fingers would turn purple before the morning was over. Lord, those berries tasted different back then. Sweeter somehow. Alive. Maybe because they came from real soil instead of factory shelves. We were poor. Poor enough that my mother patched the same dress 3 times before winter ended. But our food still came from the earth. Chickens from the yard. Vegetables from the garden. Berries from the woods. Nothing came wrapped in plastic. Nothing lasted 3 years on a shelf. And maybe that's why people were thinner back then. Not just in the body but in the spirit too. Life was hard but it was honest. Now everywhere you look there's food. Endless aisles. Endless snacks. Endless advertisements promising health in a shiny package. And somehow people have never looked more tired in their lives. That's the strange thing about modern hunger. People aren't starving anymore. They're empty in different ways. The third food on my list came from the water. Sardines mostly. Sometimes salmon when we could afford it. Back then folks called sardines poor people food. But after living this long, I've learned rich people and poor people eventually end up worrying about the same thing. Memory. You reach a certain age and you stop fearing death the way young people think you do. Death starts feeling familiar after enough funerals. What scares you is something quieter. You start forgetting little things first. A name. A street. A face you used to love. And every time it happens, a small part of you panics. That's why I kept eating oily fish all these years. People talk about the heart all the time, but your brain is your final companion in old age. Once memory begins slipping away, the world becomes a lonely place very fast. And I'll tell you something honest. The real terror of aging is not death. It's forgetting the people you buried. Because after a while, memories become your last form of wealth. The last proof that your life really happened at all. Now the fourth food on my list is the one that caused the biggest fight over the years. Eggs. Lord, people became terrified of eggs. For decades they told us the yolk was poison, said it would clog your heart, shorten your life, kill you slowly at the breakfast table. And people believed it. Entire generations started throwing away the very part that held the nourishment. I remember sitting in my kitchen one evening listening to a television doctor explain why eggs were dangerous while my mother, 82 years old at the time, stood behind him frying 2 eggs in butter every morning and still working in her garden by herself. That's when I started noticing something strange. People stopped listening to grandmothers and started listening to commercials. And somewhere along the way, food became something people feared instead of something that kept families alive. But for me, eggs became more than food after my husband passed away. The mornings changed after that. No footsteps crossing the hallway. No coffee cup placed beside mine. No newspaper left folded at the edge of the table. Just one plate, one fork, one chair sitting empty across from me like a quiet reminder that life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. Every morning I still made 2 eggs. Not because I was hungry all the time, but because routines are sometimes the only thing holding grieving people together. After my husband died, the silence at breakfast became louder than grief. That's the thing nobody prepares you for about old age. It's not just wrinkles or aching bones. It's learning how to survive ordinary moments after the people you loved are no longer inside them. And maybe that's what aging really is. Not learning how to live forever, but learning how to keep living. After loss keeps taking pieces of your world away. The fifth food on my list is red meat. Real red meat. Not the processed junk wrapped in bright plastic. I'm talking about the kind that came from animals raised under the sun, not under fluorescent lights. When I was young, people worked with their bodies. My father worked 12-hour days with hands so rough they could split wood without gloves. My husband carried lumber, fixed fences, and came home smelling like sweat, dirt, and honest exhaustion. Back then, strength wasn't something you talked about online. You either had it, or life humbled you very quickly. That kind of work demanded real nourishment. Eggs, butter, meat, food that stayed with you long after breakfast ended. And maybe this sounds harsh, but I look around now and I see people exhausted all the time. Not old. Exhausted. Weak in ways that have nothing to do with age. Bodies tired. Minds anxious. Spirits collapsing over things previous generations simply carried in silence. People call it aging now. But some of it is simply weakness. And I don't mean weakness cruelly. I think modern life has worn people down emotionally in ways they barely understand. Especially men. The men I grew up around didn't talk much about pain. They woke up early, worked until dark, buried friends without therapy, carried responsibility like a stone inside their chest. My husband hardly ever spoke about fear, even during the hardest years. But sometimes late at night, I'd hear him sitting quietly on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. That generation suffered differently, quietly, privately, almost invisibly. And maybe that silence hurt them in ways nobody knew how to heal back then. Because after living this long, I've learned something important about strength. Strength is not just muscle. It's surviving funerals. It's waking up after heartbreak. It's continuing to love people even after loss has made you afraid to. Real strength is continuing anyway. Even when life has already taken more from you than you thought you could survive. The sixth thing I've eaten most of my life is fermented food. Back then we didn't use fancy words like gut health. We just called them pickles, sauerkraut, and buttermilk. I still remember my mother lining glass jars across those dark kitchen shelves before winter came. Rows and rows of preserved vegetables sitting quietly in the dim light like little pieces of summer saved for harder days ahead. The kitchen always smelled faintly sour that time of year. Vinegar, salt, cabbage, warm bread cooling near the window. Everything took time back then. Even survival. And maybe that's why people were healthier in ways that had nothing to do with weight. Your stomach affects more than hunger. It affects your mood, your energy, your spirit. I've lived long enough to see how pain settles inside people physically. Some folks carry stress so long their entire body becomes heavy with it. Their digestion weakens. Their sleep disappears. Their patience dries up. A bitter stomach slowly becomes a bitter life. Nobody likes hearing that part, but it's true. The body remembers what the mind tries to hide. And the older I get, the more I believe modern people are suffering from speed almost as much as sickness. Everything now is instant. Instant meals. Instant opinions. Instant relationships. Nobody lets anything sit long enough to develop depth anymore. But the old foods we ate needed patience. Fermented food took weeks. Bread took hours. Even coffee demanded stillness for a few minutes before the day could begin. Now people rush through life and wonder why they feel empty afterward. Fast living created slow sadness. The seventh and final food on my list is raw cacao. Not those sugary candy bars people grab at gas stations. I'm talking about the real dark powder. Bitter. Earthy. Almost harsh the first time you taste it. Every morning I stir a spoonful into my coffee. And maybe that sounds like a small thing. But when you live long enough, you start understanding that survival is often made of small things repeated quietly over time. A warm cup in your hands before sunrise. A familiar smell in an empty kitchen. One tiny ritual telling your heart, "Not yet. Keep going." That bitterness mixed with warmth became something symbolic to me after a while. Because life turns bitter eventually for everybody. Loss does that. Aging does that. But somehow you keep finding little pockets of warmth hidden inside the bitterness if you stay alive long enough to notice them. And that's what I think many people are missing today. They're alive physically, but exhausted emotionally. I see it everywhere now. People moving through life with dead eyes. Constant noise. Constant distraction. Constant anxiety. They laugh less. Sit still less. Feel less. Somewhere along the way, they stopped truly living and started merely functioning. Most people stop feeling alive long before their funeral. That's the tragedy nobody wants to talk about. And after 108 years on this earth, I can tell you honestly, food matters. It does. These 7 foods helped carry me through a very long life. But they were never the real secret. The real secret was something much quieter than that. Now, after hearing all 7 foods, some people will probably expect me to tell them this is the secret to living forever. It isn't. Food matters. Of course it matters. Your body needs fuel the same way a fire needs wood. But after 108 years, I can tell you something far more important than nutrition labels and vitamins. Food is fuel. But the spirit is the engine. And once the spirit breaks, the body slowly follows behind it. I've seen lonely people fade away with perfectly healthy hearts. I've seen bitterness destroy bodies faster than cigarettes ever could. I've watched men survive war only to die quietly a few years after losing their purpose. Human beings are not designed to live without meaning, without love, without something waiting for them in the morning. I've seen healthy people die from hopelessness. And when you live as long as I have, you begin to understand something painful about longevity. Everybody talks about growing old like it's some kind of blessing. But nobody talks about the funerals. The older you get, the more goodbye becomes part of your routine. You bury your parents, then your friends, then the person who knew your younger face better than anyone else ever will. One day you wake up and realize almost everyone connected to your earliest memories is gone. That kind of loneliness changes a person permanently. Living to 108 means learning how to survive goodbye after goodbye. That's why old people become quieter sometimes. It's not because we have nothing left to say. It's because we've spent decades carrying ghosts inside our memories. But strangely enough, age also simplifies things. You spend your younger years chasing status, money, attention, approval. You think happiness is hidden somewhere far ahead of you. Then one day, usually after enough loss, you realize life was never asking for that much in the first place. a little sunlight through the window, a peaceful porch at sunset, someone honest enough to sit beside you in silence, the ability to forgive before time runs out. Those things start feeling richer than ambition ever did. At some point, peace became more important than being right. And maybe that's the final lesson aging was trying to teach me all along. Because now in the evenings, I sit out here beside this empty chair and watch the daylight slowly disappear across the trees. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm racing against time anymore. Maybe long life was never a reward. Maybe it was just more time to understand what mattered. So before I go, let me ask you something. What simple thing still makes you feel alive?